Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about something called integrated pest management. If you think back before we took finals and we did finals review, we'd been spending a lot of time talking about farming and agriculture and what we call these regenerative agricultural practices meant to protect the soil, protect our waterways, and ultimately produce more food in a more sustainable way. Now, one of the big things people always ask when they say, let's go organic, let's stop using fertilizers and pesticides is, then how do we control the pests? And that's the question we're going to look at today, something called integrated pest management and strategies that allow us to control pest species while still using these more regenerative practices we've been learning about. So often you'll see integrated pest management just called IPM. So if you see that acronym, that's what we're talking about. All right, so like at a just point blank, what's the definition of IPM? It's a sustainable science-based decision-making process that combines biological, cultural, physical, and chemical tools to identify, manage, and reduce risk from pests and pest management tools and strategies in a way that minimizes overall economic, health, and environmental risks. That's a huge mouthful, so we're going to break it down over time. Sort of the short story is integrated pest management is an integration of a lot of different techniques that all help reduce pests, with the belief that if you're doing multiple different things, you can largely control pest species without the use of chemical tools. So integrated pest management does allow for chemical tools when absolutely necessary. Okay, but let's just clarify, what is a pest? There are pests that we know very well as New Yorkers. There are pests that we might not know as well because we don't all live on farms. But basically, if an organism disrupts human activities, we consider them a pest. Largely, this means that they destroy our crops, perhaps they carry disease or they infect other plants, and that has a disruption to our livelihood. On occasion, we might consider things a pest just because they annoy us, like pigeons. They don't necessarily cause us harm, but we find them annoying. But largely when we're talking about pests, there is some potential harm to humans, either because they harm our food source or they could harm us directly. So here you've got on the far left, this is the Japanese beetle. It's an invasive beetle species that was brought over right about 100 years ago. And it was brought over on one single ship and found a lot of success, and it now infects over 200 different types of plants. And it basically just eats the leaves and the buds and the fruits at such a rate that it can destroy crops, both in gardens and on a larger scale. You've got cockroaches. We all know and love those as New Yorkers. The next thing you see here is a fungus that is affecting a tree. So this fungus could kill the tree. There are a lot of funguses that infect crops if they're not treated. And then rats. Rats are well known for potentially spreading disease. And that's one of the reasons why in cities we really want to manage our rodent population. Okay, so the easy solution is pesticides. This has been a solution for a long time. We talked about the Green Revolution, the invention of a lot of new pesticides. One of the major pesticides was something known as DDT. But it turned out DDT is actually really, really bad for people and causing a lot of defects and harm to human health. And this has been found to be true of many, many pesticides, that they're actually quite toxic. So they're a quick solution. They kill all of these pests and allow us to continue growing crops. Right, so there's different types of pesticides. Insecticides kill insects. You have herbicides to kill weeds, and fungicides that kill those bacterial and fungal infections. But of course, we know the consequences. You can kill non-target species, right? So you might be trying to kill the aphids, and then you kill the organisms that eat the aphids too. You might be trying to kill the weeds, and you end up killing the corn crops instead. And then they can be carried into streams and waterways via runoff, which can destroy aquatic ecosystems. And then, of course, when they reach humans, can be dangerous to us. So pesticides are clearly not the number one answer. There's a lot of drawbacks to them. So let's talk about some options. So integrated pest management is a solution. Integrated pest management seeks to utilize many different methods to control pests, not necessarily saying one is correct, but through different methods we can help resolve the issue. And they save chemical pesticides as a final resort if none of the other techniques work to control a pest. So the sort of first step is prevention. So this is things you might do before you even have a pest problem. We've talked about crop rotation, right? Many pests are specialists. So if they specifically feed on tomatoes, you might not grow tomatoes in the same field every year. That would kill off those pests and they wouldn't establish a home there. Intercropping, you may plant different crops between each other. That's going to stop the movement of the pests. And sometimes you can plant crops that might detract pests. So something my mom always did growing up, she grew tomatoes. And a lot of the pests that feed on tomatoes don't like the marigold flower. So she always planted a bunch of marigold flowers around her tomatoes. So even in her small garden, she was intercropping to control pests. Another thing for many pests are physical barriers that can just stop them from coming across. So there's things you can put down on the ground like weed barriers. You could cover plants with some sort of plastic or other things, keep out larger pests, fences as well, for things like deer that might come in and eat your crops. Say that your prevention doesn't work. You find and identify a pest. Part of integrated pest management is continuously checking for signs of pests, so checking your soil and your leaves. So you find a pest. You can use biological treatments. These are predators, so something that might eat that particular insect. You could bring in sometimes other insects like a praying mantis. You can use traps. That's what you see here on the image on the right. This is a trap that captures those Japanese beetles I was telling you about earlier. You can use crop rotation again because perhaps if you identify the aphids eating your tomatoes, you just know that you need to plant something there next year as well to root out the problem. You try all these different things. You might use pesticides. There are pesticides that are more natural. Just certain plants need oil, neem. I'm not remembering exactly what it is, but there's like an oil that you can rub on the plants. So it's obviously really labor intensive, much more difficult than just spraying a pesticide. But if it really does come down to it, integrated pest management allows for pesticide use on a case-by-case necessary basis. So why are not all farmers using IPM? Kind of the same story. Chemical pesticides have made companies a lot of money, so they're really readily available. They're relatively affordable. Many farmers have already invested money into the machinery to deploy the pesticides on their farm. As if they stop using pesticides, they've wasted essentially all that money on that equipment. And again, they're an easy, quick solution. You just run a machine over your farm, you're done. IPM methods are often more labor-intensive and require more financial investment, especially in the early years when you're transitioning from heavy pesticide use into IPM. That being said, obviously we know there's significant benefit switching from pesticide in terms of the long-term sustainability of soil and crop production, but it has definitely been a barrier to have a large-scale agricultural shift toward IPM.